to welcome everybody Kristie Middleton. Kristie's the Vice President of Business Development at Rebellious Foods, as well as the author of the book Meatless, Transform the Way You Eat and Live One Meal at a Time. She's considered a thought leader on plant-based eating, and tonight she's going to talk to us on the impact our food choices have on the environment. So please welcome Kristie Middleton.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to Greentown Los Altos for hosting this wonderful event, and to everyone who's spending their evening with us. It's really great to see so many new faces and hear some familiar names, and I'm especially excited to hear that so many of the local elected officials and representatives from their offices are here celebrating this really important cause. So it's fantastic to be joining you all. I am going to be sharing with you a presentation, and hopefully you'll be able to see my screen. Can I get some nods and thumbs ups? Okay, all right, looks like it's working. Thank you. So the future is now, and I think that couldn't be even more apparent after having heard from some of our student leaders. We know that the future is in their hands, and so I'm thrilled to hear about all the work that's happening as a result of the students who are working with this fantastic organization. We heard the wonderful music from Tammy earlier, and it sounds like she probably hails from, or at least her family hails from, the same area of the country that I do. I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, which is just north of the North Carolina border. That's me there holding this little dog on the right, and my older sister with the two dogs on the left. Jennifer and I grew up with three dogs, Pete, Casey, and Tinkerbell, and we always had lots of animals in our family, from goldfish to hamsters to birds. I was an animal lover, and I considered them members of my family, whether I was toting them around or dressing them up in my doll's clothing. I swear they actually really liked this. They were there with me, whether I was riding my bike around town or I was vegging out in front of MTV, which was new at the time when I was about this age. So it's probably no surprise that when my older sister, as older siblings often do, teased me one day when I was about to dig into a plate of scrambled eggs and said, "You know what those are, right? Dead baby birds," that I decided I didn't want to eat eggs because I loved animals and didn't want to have any part in eating any dead baby birds. My older sister may or may not have been right about that, but we ate the standard American diet. So I continued eating other things like hamburgers and the cake that I won here in my cakewalk, but I stopped eating eggs around 8 years old. I had no idea, though, that the true cost of our meat, egg, and dairy heavy diets was a lot worse than I thought it was. And it wasn't until I was in college, when a college marketing professor was talking about euphemisms, that I became vegetarian. The example that she gave was that if we were to call meat what it really is, which is the flesh of dead animals, probably far fewer people would want to eat it. And I don't think she really meant to convert anybody, but every time I sat down to eat a ham sandwich or a hamburger or the like after that, that's what I would think about. So I became vegetarian, but I really had no idea about the impacts of my food choices. I had no idea that the real cost of those eggs that I stopped eating a long time ago was that egg laying hens, those who were bred specifically for the purpose of producing the eggs that we buy in supermarkets or in restaurants, they're confined in cages that are about the size of a desk drawer. 5 to 8 birds are kept in these cages, unable to extend their wings or to take a dust bath or do anything that's natural or important to them for the duration of their lives. I had no idea that the vast majority of breeding pigs, the mother pigs who are bred so that they can make more pigs that go into our food supply chain, are kept in what are called gestation crates. These crates are roughly the size of the animal's bodies. They can't take they can't take more than a step forward or backward, can't even turn around for the duration of their pregnancies. They're put into another crate to give birth and then put back into the gestation crate, that cycle repeating over and over again for about 4 years, or the length of a presidential term. And we all know how long that can feel right now. When I learned all of these things, I decided that I wanted to become vegan and do as much as I could to protect animals. And even along that journey, I learned so much. I learned that it's not just animals who our food choices affect. I learned about this woman. Her name is Lita Galiciano. She's pictured here with her cat Pumpkin. Lita and her husband lived out in Lathrop, California, about 80 miles or so east of Oakland, which is where I am. They met in the Philippines when he was a soldier and liberated her hometown. They got married and they decided to move to Lathrop, where they were going to raise their family in true village style with other families and friends of families who could help each other take care of one another's kids. And they lived out there in relative happiness for many years. There was a small egg farm down the street from Lita and her neighbors that was eventually bought out by Oliveira Egg Ranch. Now, Oliveira Egg Ranch might conjure a bucolic farm image where there are chickens out pecking the ground, breathing fresh air, feeling the sunshine on their backs. But in reality, this was Oliveira Egg Ranch, this massive factory farm with hundreds of thousands of birds kept in cages like the cages that you just saw a moment ago. Of course, it's a travesty for the animals, but it was also a nuisance for Lita and her neighbors. This giant body of water here that you see is a manure lagoon, and that's the way that they dispose of the waste from these animals. So if you can imagine for Lita and her neighbors how horrific this was to have this factory farm right down the street from their house. Sometimes the flies were so thick that they couldn't open their windows. Sometimes the ammonia fumes were so profuse that they could hardly breathe. It caused them to have nausea, to have headaches. Sometimes their lungs would burn. The Humane Society organization that I worked with at the time, we were working on behalf of Lita and her neighbors. They sued Oliveira and were able to get a small settlement to help Lita and her neighbors because it was deemed an environmental nuisance. However, we're all still paying the price because this is typical for how factory farms dispose of their waste. This is a pig factory farm in North Carolina, not too far from where I grew up. And as I can tell you, every summer we would have either tropical storms or sometimes hurricanes that would come through. And when that happens on these factory farms, the lagoons overflow, seeping into the local waterways. That causes the algae to bloom, basically creating an oxygen deprived zone where the fish die off by the millions. It's hard to imagine the environmental destruction that these farms cause. As well as if any of you have ever driven down I-5 to Los Angeles, you probably have smelled one of these cattle feedlots miles before you ever even see it. And if you can again imagine either being one of these animals who's out there, this is where they go to be fattened up prior to slaughter, or being a worker or a family who lives in the area. It is a miserable existence. And of course, we can't talk about the environmental intensity of factory farming without talking about the drought here in California. Creating meat, eggs, and dairy is incredibly water and resource intensive. For example, to make just a pound of chicken, it requires about 500 gallons of water, whereas a pound of tofu is about 300 gallons of water. A pound of pork is 700 gallons of water. So it's very environmentally intensive, both from the resource that's required to produce the meat to the waste that is created as a result of meat production. But I also learned that in addition to being good for animals, in addition to being better for the planet, eating less meat, eggs, and dairy is also good for our health. This gentleman is Ken Chadwick. I met him when I was at the Humane Society when he was the director of dining at American University in Washington, D.C. He had been working in the food service industry, doing the dining services for universities for a couple of decades, and increasingly was seeing a demand from more and more students who wanted vegetarian and vegan options on the menus. Ken had told me he was always a contrarian, and he would say to the students, well, we have a great salad bar, so go eat there. But, it was his responsibility to give students what they were asking for. And he just heard it so much that he decided to become a vegan while he was on campus so that he could see what those students' experience was. He quickly, after just a day, realized that they were right. He said that he ate pears his first day. And so he teamed up with the dietitian and the chefs on campus to ensure that whether it was lunch, dinner, snack, or breakfast, that students had a hearty, good vegan meal that they could eat. And Ken continued with the trend of eating vegan while he was on campus, just to see what the experience was like. But he quickly started getting some benefits himself. As you can see here, he experienced a dramatic weight loss so quickly that the students on campus called him the incredible shrinking man. He was able to eventually stop taking his blood pressure medication, stop taking his cholesterol medication, and exercise comfortably, something that he hadn't been able to do in decades. He got down to the weight that he was in high school, and he started boxing and jogging, and kept doing a vegan diet long after the challenge that he had pledged to do was over. And he's still mostly vegan these days. He says that if there's something that he absolutely has to have once in a while, he might indulge. Like if it's crab season and he wants to enjoy some of Maryland's finest crabs. But most of the time he's vegan, and he says to take it from him, sometimes you're going to think it's hard, but the benefits are way more than you could ever imagine. And Ken's not alone, and that's why we're seeing the increase in food service sales in plant-based foods as well as retail sales. Just a couple of examples here. Plant-based burgers alone have now a 3.4% market share in the US, something that we would have never imagined just a few years ago. The term plant-based grew 328% on menus in the last year alone. And meat alternates, so plant-based burgers, chicken, pork, those kinds of products grew 268% from 2018 to 2019. And we're seeing it happen all over the food industry. Unilever, which is one of the world's biggest food companies, created a vegan mayonnaise, and this was after suing another company for doing something similar. They saw that the trend was there and couldn't help but get in on it. One of their subsidiaries, Ben & Jerry's, has a vegan ice cream line. Someone mentioned Haagen-Dazs earlier. They have vegan ice cream. I went to a Baskin Robbins just a few weeks ago. They have vegan ice cream. So virtually every major ice cream chain is getting in on this trend. You can't go to a Burger King and not get an Impossible Burger. Impossible, if you haven't heard of it, is a Bay Area-based startup that makes plant-based meat that is so realistic it bleeds. And their burgers are on Impossible's menus. Beyond Burger is partnering with Carl's Jr. to have its Beyond Burger available at all of their locations, as well as with Dunkin' Donuts to have their plant-based sausage breakfast sandwiches. It doesn't stop there though. There's plant-based chicken at companies like El Pollo Loco. They actually made their own plant-based chicken instead of partnering with another firm to do so. And if you want plant-based egg, there's that as well. Just Egg is available at retailers across the country, about 13,000 different store locations. So that young Kristie who didn't want to eat eggs would have been very happy to have this kind of alternative instead. As well, if lattes are your thing, there are plenty of non-dairy alternatives to milk that's out there that you can find at virtually every coffee chain these days. Starbucks kicked it off with soy milk, and then they started using coconut milk and almond milk, and now you can even get oat milk. So there's a bevy of beverage alternatives if that's your thing. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the company that I work for, Rebellious Foods, where we make plant-based chicken, both for food service as well as now rolling out into the retail sector. We recently sold our plant-based chicken nuggets to the San Ramon Valley School District, as well as to a school district in the Seattle area where we're headquartered, and hopefully coming soon to menus near you as well. But even though there are all these wonderful plant-based options out there, I don't want to fool you into suggesting that this is just going to be easy as pie. For some people it is, but if you've been eating a certain way your entire life, sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming to make changes. So I'll share with you a few tips and tricks that hopefully will ease you into it, whether this is something you want to do full time or just make some minor changes to your diet. One example is just looking at the beverage aisle. Sometimes making decisions can feel overwhelming, especially if you've never tried a plant-based milk or other product before. Keep in mind, though, that just like your non-plant-based options, there are going to be some things that you like and some that are just not as good. So if you try rice milk and you don't like it, then keep on trying until you find something that you do like. And then narrow in on that choice so that every time you go to the store, you know you're going to get one specific product. That way it doesn't feel so overwhelming every time you go. Make a commitment then. So every time you go to get that latte, you're going to get an oat milk latte. And that way you know that that's the one plant-based thing that's always going to be on your agenda or your menu. Try something like a Meatless Monday. If you haven't heard of it, this is an international campaign that was started along with the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, encouraging people to try eating meat-free just one day of the week. And it's now supported internationally by millions of people, as well as lots of organizations, healthcare and otherwise. It's a great way to start dipping your toes into meatless eating, and then you can add a meatless Tuesday and Wednesday into your repertoire should you want to. Or you can try something like Vegan Before 6, which was started by Mark Bittman, who was a New York Times food columnist. And he did this to ensure that at least 2/3 of his meals were plant-based. And some days he would continue that trend throughout the day, or if he wanted to, he could add a little bit of meat into his dinner. But it's a good way to just make sure that the majority of your meals are plant-based. And whatever you do, it's really helpful if you share what you're doing with others. Research suggests that if you tell your friends or family that you're trying to change your diet or make whatever other change you're trying to make, that you're about 42% more likely to actually be successful. So share your veg pledge. And if you want to do that in the comments here below, I'm sure you get a lot of support from your fellow attendees. And along those lines, getting friends or family to join you along this journey is a good way to help with ensuring your success. Change can be difficult, and it can also be even more difficult if you get a lot of resistance from the people around you. Our eating habits are really influenced by our friends, our family, our community. And anyone who's ever gone out to eat dinner and had the waiter approach and ask if they want dessert and has turned to their fellow diner and said, "I'll have dessert if you're having dessert," knows that our eating habits can be influenced by others. So if you want to do a meatless Monday or you want to try to eat a plant-based diet, ask your friends and family members to join you along that journey. In addition to helping you be more successful, the impacts that you're having on the environment and animals will be multiplied. And lastly, do a couple of things just to make it a little bit easier to make those changes that you want to make. So for example, if you're trying to eat more plant-based foods, go to the farmer's market or the grocery store, get a lot of really colorful, beautiful foods, cut them up, put them in eye level in your refrigerator, and make those the things that you reach for when you're craving a snack or looking for something to eat, or wash some fruit, put it in a bowl on your dining room table so that you always have access to really healthy and filling foods. At the end of the day, we, if we're lucky, sit down to eat 3 times a day, sometimes maybe more than that. And I think far fewer of us than we should think about what a huge responsibility that is, what a huge impact we have on the planet, on animals, on our own health, on workers, and many other impacts every time we sit down to eat. There's this saying that great power involves great responsibility. And I like to think that it also involves great opportunity. We have a huge opportunity to make a positive impact on the world with every meal that we eat. And I couldn't be more excited to join you all in this journey. So thank you so much to Greentown Los Altos for the important work that you all are doing. And if I can answer any questions for you or help with supporting you along this journey, it would be my pleasure. This is my contact information. And I also wrote this book called Meat Less, Transform the Way You Eat and Live One Meal at a Time. And that offers some tips and tricks for helping make your guide on a meat less or less meat journey a little easier. So thank you again.
Thank you. Outstanding. Thank you, Kristie. I don't know if y'all are picking up on that, but that's Sir Paul McCartney offering a quote on the Meatless book right there. I mean, if you don't have the book yet, now is the time. That ought to be enough of a reason to get one. Hey, Kristie, before we let you go, Can I just throw one question out to you? I know a lot of people are they're trying to eat local as a way of sort of helping with environmental climate change. Can you talk to us real quick about sort of the benefits of eating local compared to trying to eat less meat? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, I applaud anyone who's trying to make changes in their diet to support environmental improvement. There's research, however, that found from Carnegie Mellon University and a number of others that found that if we want to have an impact on the environment, that we could actually eat meat-free just 1 day a week, and doing that would have an even bigger impact than buying all of our food locally. And that really has to do with the transportation. And actually, transportation has a much smaller impact. I think a lot of people think that they're eating local, which is a great thing to do if you want to support local purveyors, local producers.
Hmm.
But in terms of the transportation impact, it's not really that much. In fact, sometimes it's even more environmentally friendly or efficient to purchase, maybe hothouse tomatoes from Canada. Or I've read that, purchasing rice from Bangladesh could actually be more environmentally friendly than purchasing it from places where maybe local rice doesn't necessarily grow. However, even just eating 1 day a week can have a bigger impact. So I would encourage you to at least try a meatless Monday.
Absolutely. I'm going to try a meatless Wednesday tomorrow night, I think. Very good. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Kristie. That was outstanding. Everybody, shake your hands, wave them crazily. Give Kristie Middleton all the respect she deserves. That was fantastic. Thank you again so much, Kristie, for being here with us tonight.